What's going on, everyone? This is Sheets with millionaire winner Bobby Firestone. I don't know if anybody realized that, Bobby won $1 million a couple of weeks ago. I haven't said it in a couple of days, so I figured I have to remind everybody of that. We also have James McCool here. For those of you that are really following us, we just wrapped up a video that I did with him specific to UFC and his tools that predict dupes, among other things. For those of you that have been following my other industry videos and whatever, I mean, I've done several things with James over the last year or two. He's one of the sharp, real sharp minds, and Bobby knows him going back much longer than I know him, actually. Except James and I have been a little closer the last year or so. He's really one of the best at the tools that he creates and knowing DFS. He created, along with Blender, Theory of DFS, a course which, although I have not gone through it, I've heard wonderful things about him, and I hope to do more things with him in the future. And I'm really happy that we're putting finally Bobby and James together in this format, because as for those of you who've been following us know, I mean, Bobby and I took kind of different paths to sort of success. Like Bob in DFS, or Bobby taught me how to play like right from the beginning. And Bobby's been playing for a long time. He's been playing before DraftKings even existed. You know what I mean? Like, he's been playing like a real long time. And he was used to one certain way of playing, really knowing everything about sports, knowing how to make the lineups, knowing the players. And I came into it kind of like, the evil empire, like I don't really want to know about the players. I just want to know how with their points on a spreadsheet or whatever it is. And as I learned more about Bobby's approach, Bobby, after a lot of fighting, finally decided to embrace a little bit more of the sims and the technology and stuff. And James is a real good combination of those two disciplines. He has tools which get really into the weeds with the actual players, and also he's really super sharp with lineup building as well. So I figured hopefully we could do stuff with him in the future as well. And I just wanted to introduce you guys from a DFS perspective, even though you've known each other longer than you've known me. But hopefully we can have James share his screen and walk you through how he would approach the slate using the tools at his disposal. So reintroduce Bobby and James.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the reintroduction. And James, always good to see you. I know we caught up last week, and it was good to chat with you after a while. And a lot's changed, obviously. You got your 3-year-old kid, and although I have to correct Sheets on one thing, I have known you, Sheets, longer, because we go back to conversation from poker days. Yeah, but yeah. So James, it's great to be here with you, and I'm looking forward to going through some of this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when it comes to what Haber was talking about, or what Sheets is talking about with the different styles of play. And kind of mixing the I know ball stuff a little bit more than like the I don't care, just whatever the numbers give me. There's a place for both of it. And for both approaches, I think that a lot of people can find success in one way or another. And I think that you guys are both actually a testament to that there's a lot of ways to skin a cat in this industry. You can know ball, or you can literally not know what shape fucking ball is. And you can still find success. So, I'm happy to be involved in this kind of stuff and talking to you guys. I'm trying to talk a little bit more and do a little bit more content in 2025 and talk with people that I know are sharp and smart. So happy to be here. Just happy to be involved.
When are you going to be talking to the sharp people? I'd be more than happy to. I'd love to get involved in something like that.
Yeah, well, maybe you will. Maybe you will. Not today, but maybe down the road.
Sheets, the king of the self-deprecating dad humor.
Yeah. No kidding.
All right. So I mean, running into this slate, like, I guess the best thing, one thing I'd be curious about is like, how would I be treating this if I was using some of your tools, or maybe you could start showing me some of those things.
Yeah, let him share his screen, Bobby.
Yeah, he can.
I can indeed. So this is where you're going to go first, right? You can go to PaydirtDFS.com, which is my website. And the first thing that you'll do is, I think really when I think about NBA from a high level, and when I think about the way that I should approach NBA, really the first thing you should be doing is deciding, before you even decide on a specific slate, you should be looking at the kind of tournaments that are offered and what fits you best. For me personally, I'm going to play a way different way than Bobby and Sheets are going to play, right? Because I do single entry 3-max stuff. I use an optimizer. I use the contest sims to get an idea of what lineup should look like, but then I end up hand building my own stuff. So I'm kind of in that middle spot of the way that I am likely going to use the tools is going to be looking at it from a single lineup to 3 lineups to 5 lineups. So I have to find stands, right? It's harder for me as a single entry player to look at a slate and say, yeah, I mean, Giannis looks a little bit overowned. I'll just come in at 30% rather than match the field at 45% or come in higher at 80%, whatever. I have to look at it and be like, am I going to play Giannis or not? Right? So that's kind of the first thing you do is you figure out, as you're looking at the different tournaments that you want to play and different GPPs and how you're going to approach them. For me personally, the first thing that I always do is just kind of go into the range of outcomes, which you can find right here. Go to NBA range of outcomes. And then when you load up, this is kind of what you'll see. It'll open up with a quick builder over here, which I'll get to here in a second. But this is the bread and butter model, which is what you would consider to be your median projections, right? This is just a projection set. But the way that I approach projections is a bit different. Whereas instead of just giving you what the projection is, I run everything through a simulation program and a couple different algorithms to come up with a couple different interesting and important aspects and variables that we can use to guide our decisions. So the median is obviously the projection, but then we also have the floor and the ceiling, which are 20th and 80th percentile. Some people like to use 25th and 75th. I like to use 20th and 80th. I think there's a lot of preference there. Top finish percentage, top 5 finish, top 10 percentage. These all tell you how often a player finishes at a certain spot in the entirety of all the players on the slate. So top finish is how often this player finishes with the most fantasy points on the slate based on the simulations. Top 5, how often they finish in the top 5 overall scorers on the slate. Top 10, top 10.
So
right?
it's just raw overall scores. Because I just want to jump in and ask a question real quick. So you really think? So we're really saying less than 1% that Jokic finishes in the top as a top scorer on the slate? Shouldn't that numbers be like 40% or 30%?
Jokic is at 45% top finish.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking at it. I just wasn't under factoring in where the decimal was. Okay, I got you now. Sorry, my bad.
Yeah. This should be percentages. I'm not actually sure why it's not. Here we are, me being a great coder. But yeah, so he finishes the top finisher 45% of the time. Giannis is 25% of the time. Victor Wembanyama is 10% of the time. Those extrapolate out obviously across the 5 and the 10. They all read from the same data set. Mm-hmm. So what it does is it simulates out the contest or the projection set 10,000 times, and then uses that information to tell us how often a player finishes in certain thresholds. Similarly to that, it uses that to tell us how often a player finishes with 20 or more fantasy points in simulations, which is for NBA, I think a very, very important threshold. Also for NFL. I have a heuristic that I won't ever use a player that I don't think can score 20 or more fantasy points. That's just a rule that I have for NFL. I also have it for NBA. And that rule is really, really important for me because it means that if there's ever a guy who projects for 19 fantasy points at 3K, I am not going to play that guy. Mm-hmm. Even though he projects okay, he doesn't project that well. And it's very likely that there's somebody else that is going to be able to replicate that kind of a score, and not having him is probably not going to kill me. But if he has a pretty decent chance to score 20 or more fantasy points, I want to be interested. These columns here, 4x, 5x, 6x, these tell you how often a player reaches 4x their salary, 5x their salary, or 6x their salary within the simulations. Jokic ends up at 6x 39% of the time, even at 12K. It's hilarious. His projections are awesome. And then GPP percentage is how often they reach 5x plus 10. So that's a older way of doing things, but that was kind of the industry standard back when I built this. So if you have a 3K player, their GPP percentage is 5x, which is 15 plus 10 to 25 fantasy points. So when you have a cheaper player, GPP percentage is going to be a more important thing. As you have more expensive players, it's not quite as important, just because the raw points matter so much more than the values. And then I also have a couple things here for ownership. So we have regular ownership, small field ownership, and large field ownership. Oops. So Giannis projected 45%, Jokic projected for 13%. Seems like there's a pretty easy decision to be made there. And then captain ownership, which captain ownership in NBA doesn't really matter that much unless you're playing Showdown, obviously. And then LevX and ValX. So LevX and ValX are still included in the ROO set, but I do not use them as much anymore because we have the contest sims, which can give me a much better idea of where the leverage is sitting, what the field thinks of a player, and whether they're over or undervalued. So that is kind of like as you get right into the slate, this is where most people start. I like to sort first by ownership so I can get an idea of who is going to be the highest owned players on the slate. I'm a big fan of saying I want to make as few decisions as possible to make as much money as possible. So when I am thinking about making as few decisions as possible, I should be doing it around the highest owned players on the slate. That's kind of where I start. And then I'll sort by 6X. I'll sort by top 10% finish or top 10 finish because I want to know, how often guys are based on their salary going to be more valuable to me in this lineup. And then after I've gotten an idea of who the highest owned players are, who the best values are, and who the best ceilings are, then I'm ready to kind of start thinking about the slate from a how am I actually going to build things perspective.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. It's all stuff that I think about that I try to figure out on my own, but I don't actually have, a sheet like this to exactly go through. And then there's some other things that SaberSim offers that gives you some range of outcomes, but I really like this way of looking at it. And I'm kind of actually disappointed in myself for not having spent more time on it sooner. You know what I mean? And I think it's interesting, even like you look at the ownership on Jokic versus Giannis, for example, tonight, and I guess there's positions do factor in, but like it's bizarre to think that Giannis. You look at all the percentages of how often Jokic is going to finish with higher scoring, and they're worth $500 apart on DraftKings. Yet the ownership is going more towards Giannis than it is towards Jokic. And it's just interesting because to me, I thought that was something I pointed out on a show I did earlier, that I thought it was a very easy decision between those two to just, if they're close, if it looks close and then the ownership's close and they're within 500 of each other, you just play Jokic and live with the results.
Yeah. Is there a research thing the same as there was in the hockey that you showed me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
With NBA, the research is actually more widespread too. So the most popular tool for the research sheets is the DEM efficiency matchups. So this is going to tell you boosts based on position for each individual team. You can look at the specific slate. You can look at specific teams. You can look at all matchups. You can look at specific positions. But this is default sorted by fantasy points per minute boost. So the position that is getting the largest fantasy points per minute boost on the slate is small forwards up against Chicago. So Chicago gives up the largest fantasy points per minute boost to small forwards. And then next is centers against the Spurs, centers against Charlotte, and then power forwards against the Spurs. If you sort this by team fantasy points per minute boost, we see that the best matchup overall on the slate based on fantasy points per minute boosts is the Spurs. There's a lot of people that swear by this model. It's kind of hard to find individual specific position boosts based on stats anywhere else. So especially if you wanted to look, if you're considering playing a center and you're like, okay, well, I have this handful of centers, who gets the biggest rebound boost so that, hopefully they can get a double-double. You'd sort it by rebound percentage boost, and you could even go by specific position if you wanted to, but you'll see that center here, Golden State against Phoenix. Phoenix is actually giving up the best boost overall for rebounds to opposing centers. So this is a really cool model. This is the one that I think most people are familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also, I have full game logs. But I mean, game logs we'll show off here in a sec because that one's a little bit more in depth. But this is another one that I think is underutilized actually. Oh no, this one is broken. I'll have to go fix this one. I think this came from my most recent run. I was trying to run things before we got into here, but that's okay. We'll go take a look at the game logs. But that table, that trending models actually tells you how a player is trending based on their last 3, 5, and 10 games and gives you actually a trending projection. So if you didn't want to use just like base projection sets, you could go based off their trending stats. And it also tell you how often they have hit their ceilings and what their trending ceiling rate is. So if you're looking at a player that's like 4K, if you have 4K for a player or whatever, and you want to go back into and look at what their trending stats are, then you can go there and say, okay, this guy has a trending ceiling rate of, or trending ceiling of like 38 fantasy points because he has actually had a ceiling recently. Whereas, you know, another 4K player maybe is a little bit less. I think Chrome hates me right now. You were having
it hated me before.
Yeah. I had some problems with Chrome earlier and some problems with Discord. I was doing some updates and trying to get those things ran, and they just wouldn't run. I wonder if that's what's happening here too. Anyway, yes, these are here. We'll let this load for a second. The next thing that I go into usually is the contest sims, though. So this is my favorite model, but it is admittedly kind of difficult to use in the time frame that you usually have for NBA, right? Yeah. When you're trying to run a contest sim, usually within the industry, you end up getting into a time crunch, especially in that last 10 minutes, and it's hard to utilize this stuff. But if you don't have any late breaking news, or if you're okay with skipping the first game on the slate, right, and giving yourself that extra 30 minutes, I think contest sims are super, super valuable. So what you can do is you can just come in here and we can say, you know, what size is the field? We'll just go with small for now, just because those are usually the contests that I play. And all you have to do is just hit run contest sim. And it'll come up and it'll throw together a contest sim for you based on what I have called seed frame technology, which is a database that I maintain of around 500,000 lineups. It will parse that database based on the contest specifications that you put in, and then simulate out that contest and tell you a lot of information about what the field did in that contest. So you're able to see, you know, all the lineups that were actually used here, some information about them, what the ownership was, what the fantasy score was that actually won that contest. So this lineup, it was projected for 267, but it won the contest for the score of 360. And then it tells you a GPP projection, which is a mix of both of those things. And it tells you how often that lineup actually won the contest that it was in. One really important wrinkle with my contest sims is that they do not sim the same field twice ever. It is a randomized field. It is not a predetermined field. So when you run this multiple times, you will very likely get different results. So it's important to understand that even though this lineup, this top one right here, won this contest the most times in this specific run, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to win every single small field, very sharp contest that you run.
Sure.
Now, it will very likely have the same kinds of players and a lot of the same player names and likely the same roster construction tendencies, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to have like Kelly Oubre and Kellen Johnson. Maybe it mixes those guys with some of the guys who are, you know, in the same price range or same projection range. So you can see some things about the lineups that won. You can then go down here and see some information about lineups as a whole, what kind of lineups were winning in this contest. So the minimum salary used lineup that actually did win this contest was 47.3. Max was obviously 50. The median, though, is 49.4. So in SaberSim, if you wanted to put together something that said only show me lineups that are 49.5K or higher, you can do that. Projections, ownership, the median ownership was 163, max 238. I think that stuff is important to know, that range of ownership. And then the most important aspect, I think, is the exposures. So this exposure column tells you how often a player was found in a winning lineup based on the simulation. The projected ownership is obviously the projected ownership of that player. The edge is the difference between the projected ownership and the exposure rate. So Aaron Gordon, while he had the highest exposure rate at 48%, his projected ownership is still higher at 55%. So he is overvalued by the field at around 7%. Osar Thompson, on the other hand, projected ownership 14%, exposure of 40%. He is well undervalued by the field, 27% edge on that. Giannis, like we were talking about, he ends up he's in the winning lineup 33% of the time, but his projected ownership is 45, so he's a negative value, whereas Jokic shows up just as often, but at only 14% ownership. So you get massive positive ownership. And this is just nice justification of when you have that intuitive thought of we should probably just be playing Jokic. There you go. You should probably just play Jokic in that situation.
Yeah, no, this is really interesting. I actually am like, I love this stuff because, like you said, it doesn't only just like confirm sort of thoughts you have, or even, or maybe point out some of the differences, but it really gives you an idea. And one of the things we talk about on our site, and we really want to do, is help people become better players, not just try to give them the answer for the plays that day. This is a good justification of how to actually. I mean, it's a good way to actually learn how to get better without actually, just saying, okay, this is a better play because I like him against so and so. You know what I mean? It makes a lot of sense actually, and I think it's really cool. I need to get an account so I can play around with this a little bit, because
I will make you an account when we are done with the show.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I would love to take a look at some more of this stuff. And it is interesting because, like, NBA, so much of what we're running into is literally all the late news. It's so crazy. I don't mean before lock. I mean actually after lock. I mean a lot of things. So for example, last night I finished, I played one lineup in the Monster. I finished third in the Monster because I had Steven Adams, who was owned by like 4 people in the tournament. And everybody, like 58% of the people, played Joe Val. So I've been talking with Sheets about this. We've been flirting with this. I've just been upping projections for anybody I even sort of like, even if it's just by a point or so, for the later games, just because I think there's such a massive edge, especially if you have news pending, like Şengün was questionable yesterday. If you have news pending, which is pretty much every day, I'm tending to go that way. Do you find that happening with any of your projection sets, or does it not really factor in for you?
So it factors in, but I'm kind of a purist. So I don't touch. I'm pretty much hands off, unless there is a very specific kind of thing where, like, if there's a lot of value, one of the things that projection sets do, or ownership projection models do not catch, is that if there's a lot of value, you got to ramp up the ownership on someone like Jokic. You got to ramp up the ownership on these studs.
Yep.
So I will be a little bit fidgety when it comes to stuff like that. I will touch projections very rarely if I go in and think to myself and go in and look at baseline rates and say, this guy just does not like if I have a short sample, something like that. If I have like 3 games for a player, and so he's projecting for a fantasy points per minute of like 1.6 or something, and I look at that, I'm like, let's fucking chill out on that a little bit. Let's put him down to like 1.2.
Well, hold on. Well, James, dispense with that for a second, because I'm not so much the I know what Bob was getting at. Not so much do you screw with your projections if you kind of like eyeball them and don't like them. But the theory though that I kind of mess around with, was Bob was getting at, was that it's kind of like poker, right? If you have the ability to act last, right? If you're the dealer, you have an advantage, right? So the more flexibility you have, the more information that you can process, the better. So I always had this idea that all else, famous statistical last words, all else being equal, right? You'd want to have more exposure to late games, so you could get more flexibility. The problem is there's no way to quantify in advance what that flexibility is. But in my head, I'm like, just because you can't quantify it doesn't mean you shouldn't be doing something directionally. I tried everything. What I tried to do without messing with the projections too much was I would like up the total for like the late game by even a freaking point. You know what I mean? Just anything that at least I felt I did something. So you never thought about that, about like relative strength of games based on their timing and stuff?
So I do, and I was just trying to explain that I don't really touch anything for any reason, and I was trying to get to that part of like,
sorry. As usual, I interrupted.
It's okay, I get it. I think that you have to care about that in NBA as a player. I think you have to care about that, and I do preach it. And I typically will say, if people usually ask me about 20 minutes before slate lock, can we skip the first game? Right. And that's a really important question to ask. And that's a sign of somebody who knows how to actually play NBA DFS, because with the 3-door problem, we don't know what we don't know yet.
Right.
So the more information that we can garner and the more games that we can chop off the block, I mean, you get double benefit of removing the early games. Not only do you remove the early games in terms of you already know for the most part what is happening in those games. So you already know that information. You can remove that from your head. But also, if you can skip the first 2-3 games of a slate, you condense the player pool that you are working with, and you can make better decisions based on that as well. So I am a really, really big fan of pushing back. That being said, I don't touch projections just because I think that I'm just a purist. I understand, and I don't even have a problem with people doing it, to be clear. I'm just a purist when it comes to my projections and my projection models, and I have not found like I won't even kick somebody out of a projection set if they are a late questionable, because you just never fucking know with the NBA.
Yeah.
Even though people will always tell me like, "Oh, are you going to remove him? Like he's a late questionable." I'm like, "No, we don't know. We have no idea what's going to happen here. I will adjust as soon as we find out. Like I'll have a projection set ready as soon as we find out, but I can't remove him yet because he's questionable."
So let me ask you really quickly on that projection, because that's an interesting point that me and Sheets deal with all the time. There's most sites do like a funny little hedge thing where they'll project like Ja Morant, when he's questionable, not doubtful. Before he was doubtful the other night, but when he was questionable, they projected him down to 29 fantasy points, which can never be his median outcome. Absolutely
no.
Not. You will leave it as the original, right? For a questionable guy. So what you're saying, it's not going to drop them by like if Giannis was questionable tonight, is he going to go from projecting at 60 down to like 40? Because that seems like that part. Okay, good. That's what I wanted to.
No. Something that ETR was doing this season is they would dock projections based on a questionable tag, and I'm like, that's fucking stupid. You can't do that, because the thing about questionable is, if they play, you have to assume that they are healthy.
That's like giving a pitcher half the projection if it's a 50% chance of a rain.
Right. Yeah. It does not work that way, because at that point, if you were to dock anybody who's questionable, like you would end up destroying portfolios for MME players because they wouldn't get them. Like you're not getting any Ja Morant the other night when he's questionable. And if he plays, he's likely healthy and likely going to play better than what you projected him for. It's a movement that I have seen other companies make in recent years of trying to kind of skirt the labor aspect of projections so that they are in a better position and a more robust projection set. But it's not robust, it's just wrong. So no, I don't dock based on questionable. I think that's very simple.
One of the things that Bobby likes to do as far as late swap goes, if he's not going to do like a full late swap set, he'll kind of eyeball it and say, okay, so I need to get a little different here. I need to get a little chalky here. One thing that James has, I presume he has for basketball too, which might be useful. Do you have a pivot finder for basketball?
I do. I was going to show it off.
Yeah.
Love to see that.
Yeah. So first off, game logs did load. I don't know why they took so long to load, but this is a massive, like this. Somebody could build a website around just my game log app. Dead serious. It has game logs for both season logs and game logs. It has a correlation matrix based on fantasy points or minutes. So if you wanted to say, oh, great. Now it's going to fucking run another init baseline. If you wanted to say between any 2, 3, 4, 5 players or whatever and create a correlation matrix for them based on either minutes or fantasy points, you could do that. So like if we wanted to say, for instance, Russell Westbrook and
Jamal Murray.
Yeah, Jamal Murray. Yeah. You can see the correlation coefficients between those two. Then you can also add in like Michael Porter Jr., right? And you can like put together this whole thing that tells you what they can do together for fantasy. What I actually think this is really important for is for minutes. For blowout situations, like who is the person who's not going to share the minutes together, right? Position versus opponent is really cool. Kind of an interesting way to look at how players in certain positions have performed against teams. So the Orlando Magic, here's all the point guards in my system and what their fantasy point outcome was and what their average fantasy outcome is against the Orlando Magic, right? But then this one, the game rotations is just popcorn machine, but better. This is, you can see all of the rotations for any team, for any game they've played this year, and you can do it at a player level. So instead of looking at a full team, you can just look at the rotations of individual players for any date. You can look at it for certain spreads. So if you want to look at the rotation for Memphis in blowouts, you can move this from 0 to 15. So any game that ended with a spread point of 15 or more, you can see what the rotations look like for specific players, right? This is probably the most underutilized thing on my entire site. People talk about Popcorn Machine and go there. They should be using this. But the Pivot Finder is super cool. And I think that this is, for a single entry player for NBA, I think this is probably one of the most useful tools on the site. So say that you just went and built a cash game lineup, right? My way of building single entry for NBA, especially for something like the 555 or the 300 or whatever, right? These higher dollar contests. I want to start with a cash lineup with a shit ton of ownership. And then I just want to find who the weakest ownership is and get off of them for somebody who's lower owned. That gives me relative value. It allows me to have a lineup that is low volatility because it has a whole bunch of ownership. Gives me a decent finishing percentile, which I'm happy with in smaller field stuff. So what you can do is, remember, we went and looked and we said, all right, who are going to be the high-owned players here? Aaron Gordon, Kobe White, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Moussa Diabate, right? So when we're looking at these, we can go over to the Pivot Finder and we can just say, just show me all of the pivots that I can make for Aaron Gordon within $300 and actually, let's say within $500 and 3 points of median. So then we can go up here, simulate the appropriate pivots. And what that will show you is any players within $500 of him that project within 3 fantasy points of him. Mm-hmm. So we can see, here's Aaron Gordon. He's projected for 55% ownership. We could probably just go with Ausar Thompson, who projects for basically exactly the same, has like the same distributions here, a little bit lower of a floor, $100 more, but only 14% ownership. And you can play him at power forward. Mm-hmm. This tool, if you're building out a single entry lineup, I think is gold. Mm-hmm. Because you can go through all of the chalk. If you wanted to look at all of the top 5 owned players too, you can do that. So here's top X owned. Here's how many players I want to check. Let's go ahead and simulate that. We see what 5 players we're going to go through. Aaron Gordon, Kobe White, Giannis, Diabate, and Kelly Oubre. And then it'll go through the run for each one individually. Mm-hmm. And at the end, what it's going to do is it's going to pop out a table that shows you all of the appropriate pivots that you can make based on the chalk piece that it was pivoting off of. So it's very likely that we're not going to have that many pivots for, a super expensive player that projects really well. Yeah. But if we sort this, we see that we have 5 pivots off of Aaron Gordon. We have 2 pivots off of Kobe White, 3 pivots off of Kelly Oubre, and then a shit ton of pivots off of Moussa Diabate.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So based on this, who are you going to get off in your single entry lineup, Bobby?
So, if I was using this, I would have done the same thing I would have done originally, which is play Ausar Thompson instead of Aaron Gordon.
There you go.
But by the way, and I said that earlier, I said how much I liked Ausar Thompson earlier. But see, when you actually showed the other part of the screen too, even the percentage of being in the winning lineup and all that stuff, and you can see that well, I don't know if you can see it on this part of it, but that Ausar has the better what's the word I'm looking for?
Better edge.
Yeah. There's a huge edge, difference versus the chalky Aaron Gordon play, which. Yeah, Aaron Gordon is going to hit that median. Maybe if you're playing single entry, maybe you're playing cash games, Aaron Gordon's the right thing. But overall, I will probably be the kind of thing where I play Ausar Thompson over Aaron Gordon because, and it proves it that he is more likely going to be, you're getting much better edge on him. Yeah. This is really, really awesome. I look forward to playing around with this. I haven't, it's funny because I've done a lot of things so much. When I was first playing DFS, it was a lot in my head. Like literally there was hardly any good projection sets. They were unreliable. Things were breaking all the time. I was hand building absolutely everything. And it was mostly just entirely what I thought. Even when I was working at Roto Grinders, I was doing that mostly.
Yeah.
But these things are really an awesome extra, they really do give you an extra edge, especially if you know how to utilize them correctly. So I really love going through this stuff, and I look forward to playing around with it a little bit on my own, just to see, how often what my instincts match up with, if at the very least. Not to mention maybe getting some ideas for different things that I hadn't really considered. But I really like this. I think this is really, really a cool. This is an amazing system. I can't believe you built all this.
Yeah. And that's the cool thing is I have built all of this shit. And one of the things people always, give me compliments on, I'm going to toot my own horn a little bit here, is on turnaround time. If there is a problem, I'm I'm around most of the time to fix it.
Yeah.
I don't have much downtime today. I had things broken for like 3 hours on the NBA betting models, and that's maybe the longest the model has been down in like 5 years. That was within my control. Like sometimes app structures break, and it's like I can't fucking do anything about that. But I am really trying to be around for that kind of stuff. One other thing that I did also want to point out on this for somebody like Sheets, as an MME player, like for you too, Bobby, right? What you can do with this is now you have a nice little list, and you can export this too, right? You have a nice little list of all of the players that you can build into an if then for your rules, right? Like if this lineup has Musa Diabate, then try to force in instead, Oscar Thompson. Or if you have a certain set of lineups that, if you wanted to say max 4 of these guys with at least one of these guys, you do that too. You have a really handy little list of if-then statements that you can make for your lineups for MME. And I think that's something that is really important to do for NBA, especially because you want to avoid Sheets and I were talking during the last video about combinatorial ownership and correlated ownership. And you don't want to have all of your lineups with like Oscar Thompson. You don't want to pair all of them with Musa Diabate.
Right.
Like you want to make sure that you have some variation there. So that's a nice little quick and dirty way of putting together that kind of a list.
That's really, really cool. I hope people are really taking a look at this and letting us know what you think. We already people are commenting in our Discord about how they love the MMA stuff. But this is really, really fascinating, and I really want to play around with it a little bit.
Listen,
send me your email. I'll set it up.
Listen, go right back to the beginning of when I started doing this stuff with you, Bobby. I don't bring people in here that are fucking full of shit. You know what I mean? Like, and to be perfectly honest, I mean, as I always am, people I bring on are people who's I literally use myself.
Right.
And I only wish that, not only wish. I mean, I'm learning. I'm learning more. And when I first used James' stuff, it was literally just as another like projection source to like track, whatever it is. But as I got more familiar with him, there's other stuff in there that I want to learn how to use.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me see this real quick. Yeah, this is pretty awesome stuff. I would love to separately from this call have a conversation with the two of you guys about some other ideas that are popping in my head. But I really appreciate this, James. Like, again, there's so many different ways and so many different things you sort of instinctually do as a player, and it's really interesting to know even why you're doing them. I actually used to feel that way even as I was getting better at poker, trying to read and understand going through every articles or 2+2 or whatever, or I'm sorry, pocket fives or whatever. Just trying to figure out like, why am I doing what I'm doing? And a lot of times it confirms it. A lot of times it'll point out a flaw in what you're doing. And I actually really think this stuff is really helpful. And I think all users would get a lot out of it.
All right, we're gonna stop the stream. We'll talk about a couple of more things offline. But for everybody else, obviously check James' stuff out. You'll definitely be seeing more of him within our circles. That's for sure. And